if you sign up to climb Mount Everest, you go in with a very specific set of expectations, right?
Right, yeah. You know it's going to be brutal.
Exactly. You expect the freezing temperatures, you expect the physical exhaustion, and you know that just navigating the ice falls is going to be like one of the hardest things you ever attempt in your life.
Which honestly is entirely fair. I mean, the difficulty is essentially the point of the whole thing.
Right.
It's a massive endeavor by definition. And pushing through that friction, that pain, is part of the prestige of actually reaching the summit.
Yeah, exactly. But imagine you get halfway up the mountain and you slowly start to realize that the structural supports you're relying on aren't just failing by accident.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like you discover that the expedition leaders, the actual people who organize the climb, they are secretly cutting the ropes.
Wow. Yeah, that changes things.
Right. And you look around and half the climbers in your group have just vanished into the snow. But the remaining climbers, the guides, the people down at base camp, everyone is just going about their day totally pretending it's normal. Like nobody says a word about the missing climbers.
Yeah, because that shifts the scenario from, a rigorous test of endurance to just a fundamental failure of the system that organized the expedition in the first place.
Exactly.
It means the environment itself is structurally compromised.
Right. And when we look at our sources for today, that is precisely the dynamic playing out in the highest tiers of global education. So, okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for today's deep dive is to look at a massive, deeply entrenched taboo in higher education quitting a PhD.
It really is the ultimate taboo.
It is. We're looking behind those ivy-covered walls to see what's actually driving incredibly brilliant people out of academia, and we're drawing on a really diverse stack of sources today.
Yeah, we have a great mix.
We've got a transcribed discussion between academic researchers. We have major institutional reports from the Higher Education Policy Institute, which we'll just refer to as ECI, and some landmark quantitative studies from peer-reviewed journals like Nature and Research Policy.
And, I think it's important to point out that this extends far beyond just a simple discussion about university life.
Oh, for sure.
We are essentially looking at the mechanics of burnout, the economics of institutional prestige, and really what happens when incredibly driven people realize the system they bought into is deeply, deeply flawed.
Completely. And if you're listening to this right now while commuting to a corporate job or running a business or just trying to navigate your own career path, you are going to find immense value in this.
Yeah, totally.
Because this deep dive is really a fascinating look into the sunk cost fallacy, the architecture of toxic work cultures, and the undeniable courage it takes to just walk away from prestige when an environment is no longer serving you.
It takes so much courage.
It really does, because in academic circles, just admitting you even have the desire to leave a doctoral program, it's treated as this ultimate betrayal.
Yeah.
It's a conversation relegated to whispered venting sessions in empty corridors or posted on anonymous internet forums at 2 a.m.
It is shrouded in this intense systemic shame. And our sources highlight this perfectly. There's a transcribed discussion with a researcher who admitted that during their own PhD, not a single day went by where they didn't actively think about quitting.
Wow, every single day.
Every day. And after successfully finishing and speaking to hundreds of other students, they realized this crucial baseline fact: these feelings of wanting to quit aren't just common. They are a structural reality of modern academia.
But this is where I find myself struggling a bit with the dominant narrative, because when students voice these doubts, academia often tells them to just, suck it up.
Or yeah, you're just not cut out for it.
Right. The response is usually this is an elite program. It's supposed to be intellectually rigorous. You're just being tested. So my question, based on these sources, is this actually just the normal rigor of intellectual training, or has academia somehow managed to normalize actual preventable suffering?
Well, it's tempting to view it as necessary rigor,
right?
Because that flatters the institution.
Sure.
But the data we have points to something else entirely. Academia has basically normalized chronic stress under the guise of intellectual endurance.
Wow.
The foundational argument we have to establish here, and what experts stress over and over in these journals, is that these feelings of wanting to leave are not a personal failing.
Okay.
Deciding to leave a PhD is a highly considered legitimate adult decision. It is not an indicator that someone simply isn't smart enough to handle the science.
So if we accept that dropping out is this legitimate choice that so many people are secretly agonizing over, the next logical step is to figure out the scale, right? How many people are actually pulling the ripcord?
Right.
And trying to find this out is where the sources get really eye-opening. Because when you look at official statistics agencies, like the Higher Education Statistics Agency in the UK, they don't even publish complete PhD completion data by mode of study.
They don't. And the April 2024 HEPI report explicitly calls this out.
It's wild.
It is. The very system that is producing this massive attrition rate doesn't officially track the complete picture of who leaves and when.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because you have to ask yourself why a data-obsessed institution like a university would suddenly start tracking data.
Exactly. It's incredibly suspicious.
It's almost like a tech startup using a freemium user model, right? A startup will acquire a massive volume of free users, fully expecting like 50% of them to churn and delete the app within a month.
Right, yeah.
But they don't broadcast that churn rate because they rely on the sheer volume of users to generate the data that makes the company valuable. It seems like the universities are doing the exact same thing with early career researchers.
That is a very apt way to look at the mechanics of it, actually. Because when sociologists and policy institutes piece together the available evidence from various cohorts, the actual non-completion rate for doctoral students in the UK sits somewhere between 25 and 50%.
Wait, 50%?
Up to 50%, yes. And in the United States, extensive reviews show that roughly 50% of all doctoral students will drop out before finishing. 1 in 2.
1 in 2. I mean, think about that. If you were sitting in a lab right now with 4 brilliant, highly vetted graduate students, statistical reality dictates that 2 of them are not going to cross the finish line.
Exactly.
When the failure rate of a program is 50%, that completely shatters the illusion that dropping out is just an individual anomaly.
Precisely. And that explains the lack of transparent tracking, you see.
Right, hide the numbers.
Yeah, by making the attrition numbers invisible, the institution protects its pipeline of cheap academic labor. If every incoming student believes that dropping out is just a rare, isolated weakness, the system never has to answer for its own design.
It just maintains the illusion of a strict meritocracy.
Right, rather than having to admit to a massive structural flaw that literally burns through half of its workforce.
Okay, so since we know that 50% of these incredibly bright students are churning out of the system, we have to look at the internal cost of that churn.
Yes.
Because from our sources, it's clearly not a lack of intellect driving them away. It is a severe systemic mental health crisis.
It is a verifiable, well-documented crisis. We aren't just talking about students feeling, a bit stressed before a dissertation chapter is due.
Right, this isn't just pre-test jitters.
Exactly. There's a landmark study by Levesque and colleagues published in the journal Research Policy. They looked at over 3,000 Belgian PhD students. The methodology was extremely robust, and they found that doctoral researchers are more than twice as likely to experience a common psychiatric disorder, specifically clinical depression or severe anxiety, compared to the highly educated general population outside of academia.
Twice as likely. That is staggering.
It is. And that isn't an isolated finding either.
Yeah.
It's backed up by Nature Biotechnology, which published a study by Evans and colleagues showing clear evidence of a mental health crisis driven by unrelenting institutional pressure.
And then you have that global PhD survey conducted by Nature itself.
Right.
They found that 36% of all doctoral respondents had actively sought professional medical help for anxiety or depression that was caused directly by their studies.
Over a third of the global doctoral population requiring clinical intervention just to cope with their job.
And you have to factor in that those are only the individuals who actually had the time, the financial resources, and the personal bandwidth to even seek professional help.
That's a great point. The actual number of those suffering is likely much, much higher.
Oh, undoubtedly.
And if you look at this Verdlick literature review from 2018, it digs into the specific causes of this distress. They found that a lack of work-life balance is the single strongest predictor of psychological breakdown in these students.
Because the culture just demands it.
Yes. The culture routinely views working 60 to 80-hour weeks, abandoning weekends, and neglecting your physical health as a necessary badge of honor for a quote-unquote serious scientist.
Okay, I want to push back on a phrase that constantly gets thrown around in this context, even in some of the supplementary reading we looked at.
Ugh.
People always bring up imposter syndrome.
Ah, yes, imposter syndrome.
Right, like when a student says they feel overwhelmed, the response is often, oh, you just have imposter syndrome. You just need to believe in your own intelligence more.
Right, gaslighting them a bit.
Exactly. Because when a student feels utterly worthless and exhausted after working an 80-hour week for 6 months straight, Isn't imposter syndrome sometimes just a really convenient label?
Oh, absolutely.
It feels like a way to blame the student's internal psychology for a deeply toxic external environment.
This raises an important question, and the distinction you're making is vital. I mean, imposter syndrome is a real cognitive distortion. It's when you make a faulty internal assessment of your own abilities, feeling like a fraud despite clear evidence of your competence.
Right, which happens.
It happens. But we have to differentiate between a student wanting to quit because of a temporary cognitive distortion versus wanting to quit because the external environment is causing lasting, irreversible harm to their health.
Right, like if you are sitting in a room and the building is literally on fire, it's not imposter syndrome making you want to run out the front door. You're just accurately assessing a dangerous situation.
Exactly. You're just trying not to burn. And to understand the mechanics of that fire, we need to transition from the internal mental toll to the external drivers.
Okay.
In the literature, the pressures pushing students out usually fall into what we might call a triad of despair: supervisors, stipends, and the job market.
The triad of despair. I like that. Well, I don't like it, but it fits. Let's start with supervisors. Because Sverdlik and colleagues identify the supervisory relationship as the single most influential external force in a PhD student's life.
Which makes sense, given the power dynamics.
Completely. The sources give us some incredibly stark anecdotes of what this looks like in practice, because the power dynamic is so heavily lopsided. Your supervisor controls your funding, your graduation timeline, your future references.
They hold all the cards.
All of them. They are a single point of failure for your entire career. On the milder end of the dysfunction spectrum, the sources reference a thread from Academia Stack Exchange where a student wanted to quit after just 6 weeks.
6 weeks?
Yeah. Why? Because their primary supervisor routinely took over a week to reply to even the most urgent emails. The student was essentially adrift.
Just totally ignored.
But then we look at the dark end of the spectrum.
Right, the environments that cross the line into genuine abuse.
Yeah. The sources highlight this devastating account on the PhD subreddit. A student described a supervisor who literally screamed and swore at them, physically altered their laboratory experiments without telling them, and forced them to stay overnight to fix broken setups.
That's horrifying.
And it gets worse. The student who held that lab position before them ended up with clinically diagnosed PTSD and was still in therapy 2 years later.
Wow.
And the mechanism that allowed this to happen is the most shocking part. The university's HR department protected the supervisor because they brought in massive research funding.
Well, what's fascinating here, and tragic, is how the economic structure of university research dictates this exact behavior.
Because of the grants.
Exactly. Grants awarded to a principal investigator, or PI, don't just pay for the science. The university takes a massive cut of that grant, sometimes 30 to 50%, for what they call facilities and administration.
Oh, so the PI is a major revenue generator.
Huge. So when a university prioritizes protecting a lucrative grant over the basic human welfare of the students doing the actual pipetting and coding, the institutional support system hasn't just failed.
It's functioning exactly as its financial incentives dictate.
Exactly. Which brings us directly to the second part of that triad, the financial architecture for the students themselves, the stipends.
Oh man, the stipends.
The financial compensation is shockingly low. One of the sources mentions a historical stipend of around £12,000 a year.
Wait, 12,000 for the whole year?
For the whole year,
Oh, wow.
which falls well below minimum wage when you factor in the 60-plus hours they actually work.
That's essentially poverty.
It is. And looking at the recent 2025 HEPI survey data, the economic reality is getting worse. Currently, 68% of full-time doctoral students are engaging in additional paid work during term time.
Just to afford groceries and rent.
Yep.
Like, you are expected to operate at the absolute limits of human cognition, managing a highly complex, self-regulated research project, and then you have to go work a part-time job just to survive.
And the mechanism here is classification, right? Universities classify them as students rather than employees.
Which shields the institution from basic labor laws.
And minimum wage requirements, exactly. That classification is a crucial cost-saving mechanism. It guarantees high-volume research output at a fraction of market value.
So for many students, the decision to drop out isn't even a philosophical debate about their love for science.
No, it becomes a purely mathematical, financial necessity.
Right. The math just doesn't work. And even if you survive the abusive supervisor and you somehow survive the poverty level stipend, you slam right into the third part of the try out the job market?
The ultimate bottleneck.
This is the ultimate structural bottleneck. It's like a rigged casino game. You are betting your mental health, your prime youth, and your financial stability for the chance to become a professor.
Right.
But according to a study by Larson and colleagues, while the number of biological science PhDs grew by 83% over a 10-year period, those graduates face only a 12.8% chance of ever securing a tenure-track academic position.
Nearly impossible odds. And we should clarify why a tenure-track position is the holy grail they're all chasing.
Yeah, please do.
Tenure offers permanent job security, academic freedom to research what you want, and a stable salary. It is literally the job they're specifically training for. But the math of the academic system makes it nearly impossible to attain.
Because it's essentially structured like a pyramid scheme.
Basically, yes.
One tenured professor might train 15 PhD students over the course of their career, but that professor only vacates one chair when they retire. So the math guarantees that 14 out of those 15 students will never get that job, no matter how hard they work.
Exactly. So when you synthesize all of this data, the economic protection of toxic supervisors, the exploitation through poverty-level wages, and a job market that structurally rejects nearly 90% of its applicants, you realize something profound.
Which is?
Leaving a PhD is not giving up. When the institutional math no longer makes sense, transitioning out of academia is a highly rational, strategic career move.
Okay, so let's look at the actionable side of this. If you're listening to this and you are currently trapped in the system feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, how do you actually evaluate your situation?
That's the critical question.
How do you plot an exit without feeling like you are blowing up your entire life?
Well, the advisors referenced in our sources suggest the first step is diagnosing the root cause.
Okay.
You have to clearly differentiate between wanting to abandon the PhD itself versus wanting to escape a fixable institutional problem.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. For instance, if you're profoundly isolated, can you actively build a community outside your lab?
Right.
If you are facing severe burnout, does your university offer a formal leave of absence so you can step away and recharge? Or could you maybe transition to a part-time PhD? If your supervisor is neglectful, is there a mechanism to request a switch or bring on a co-supervisor?
So you essentially audit the system to see if there are any levers you can pull to change the environment before you change your career entirely?
Precisely.
Yeah.
But if you've tried those levers and the environment remains toxic, or if the system is just fundamentally misaligned with your goals, student advisors use two very specific diagnostic questions.
Okay, what's number one?
Number one, does your target career actually require a PhD?
Which is a huge reality check. I mean, if you want to be a data scientist at a tech firm or a policy analyst, do you really need a doctorate or just the coding and analytical skills you've already learned?
Right, usually it's just the skills. And question number two is even more revealing about your internal state.
Okay.
If an authority figure told you that you absolutely had to stop your PhD right now, today, how would you feel?
Wow. So what does this all mean? If you ask yourself that question and your immediate visceral reaction is a massive wave of relief rather than sadness or disappointment, that relief is your ultimate emotional compass.
Absolutely.
If the thought of never having to walk back into that lab makes you feel like you can finally breathe again, that tells you everything you need to know about the toll it's taking on you.
It does. It really does. And if relief is your dominant emotion, there is a structural path forward that many departments conveniently fail to advertise.
Oh.
It's a concept known as mastering out.
Okay, let's define that clearly. Because my assumption has always been that if you leave a PhD program, academia basically brands you a dropout and you just walk away with nothing but a gap on your resume.
Yeah, that is a myth perpetuated to keep people in the pipeline.
Really?
Yes. The reality is that most major universities offer an exit award based on the heavy research and coursework you have already completed.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, depending on the institution, you can transition your completed work into an MPhil, which is a Master of Philosophy, an MRAs, a Master of Research, or a traditional MSc, a Master of Science.
That's amazing.
Mastering out is not a consolation prize. It is a highly respected, graceful exit that converts years of aborted doctoral research into a recognized, tangible postgraduate credential.
But academia has this deeply ingrained habit of painting the corporate world as the dark side.
Oh, they love calling it the dark side.
Oh. Right. They make it seem like if you leave the ivory tower, corporate employers will see you as a failure who couldn't cut it. So what does the transition actually look like for those who choose to take their master's and leave?
Well, the academic or career binary is a complete institutional trap.
Okay.
People who leave PhD programs routinely go on to build incredibly lucrative, fulfilling careers in tech, government, NGOs, healthcare, and consulting.
Because corporate employers don't see them as dropouts.
Exactly. They see them as highly trained specialists.
Because of the mechanisms of the training itself. I mean, even a partial PhD is essentially the ultimate corporate boot camp.
It really is.
When you master out, you aren't selling an unfinished dissertation, you are selling elite, transferable professional skills.
Exactly. You have developed persistence, which in the corporate world translates to the ability to manage massive multi-year projects with minimal oversight.
Oh, for sure.
You've learned versatility and resilience because scientific research is largely a process of failing repeatedly, troubleshooting the error, and recovering.
Right. You are likely analyzing massive complex data sets, which translates directly to high-level problem solving and strategic forecasting.
Yes.
And you have spent years defending your ideas to highly critical academic committees, which means you know exactly how to communicate complex concepts to skeptical stakeholders. Any Fortune 500 company or agile startup would kill for a candidate with that exact skill set.
And we see this reality reflected perfectly in the testimonials from places like Reddit.
Yeah, I read some of those in the sources.
Right. Former students who mastered out talk about immediately landing six-figure jobs because they knew how to frame their research as project management.
Which is brilliant.
They talk about rapidly recovering their physical and mental health once they were out of that 80-hour work week cycle.
Of course.
And they talk about the return of simple human joys, like literally just finally having the free time on a Sunday to watch the Super Bowl with their friends without feeling this crushing sense of guilt that they should be in the lab.
Man, that guilt is so real. There is a quote from one of those Reddit threads in our sources that I think just perfectly distills this entire deep dive.
So which way?
A former student who successfully transitioned to industry wrote, "It's not that you're quitting. That implies you haven't learned anything. You are just taking a different fork in the road."
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, stepping away from an environment that is making you chronically ill or exploiting your labor or compromising your values is never a failure.
Yeah.
It requires a profound level of self-awareness to look at a prestigious system, recognize its flaws, and actively decide to walk away. It is the ultimate act of choosing your own well-being over an institutional title.
Choosing yourself. I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to remind you that a person's intelligence, their work ethic, and their fundamental value as a human being can never, ever be defined by a three-letter title in front of their name.
Absolutely not.
Navigating away from a bad structural situation is a universal life skill. Whether you're walking away from a toxic academic department, a dead-end corporate career, or even a one-sided relationship, recognizing the sunk cost fallacy and knowing exactly when to pivot is a superpower.
It truly is. And looking at the sheer scale of this attrition leaves us with a critical, broader question to ponder.
Okay, what is it?
If the global academic system fundamentally relies on a mechanism of cheap labor and actively normalizes a culture that burns out and discards 50% of its brightest, most capable minds, what does that mean for the future quality of the scientific research, the medical breakthroughs, and the technological innovations that the rest of society is relying upon?
Oh, wow. It is a genuinely chilling thought. We need those brilliant minds operating at their best, not broken by the very system that was built to nurture them. It brings us right back to that mountain. If you realize the expedition guides are actively cutting the ropes, and you make the calculated decision to turn around and walk back down to base camp alive and healthy, you didn't fail the mountain, you survived it.
Well said.
And sometimes choosing to walk away is the most triumphant, successful thing you can possibly do.